Okay, we are doing this. We are live. This is amazing. Thumbs up, Robert? Yes, okay, great. Fabulous. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in to this YouTube Live, that will be a Facebook Live, that will be a thing on social media, which is really funny because that's why we're here today, is to talk about social media and just how digital has affected all of us in real life. So I have the incredible honor tonight to have both Jeff Orlowski, director of The Social Dilemma, and Robert Moratore, director of Childhood 2.0, in conjunction with Jamin and Kiowa Winans, who will not be here this evening. And we're going to go behind the scenes. This is incredible. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Yay! So, ideally we could have been together in real life, but 2020. However, I've been looking for gratitude and positivity in anything I could this year, whether it is a cloud or a rainbow or a hug. And one thing that I think is a positive about 2020 is that if people were living their lives pre-pandemic, they might have been too busy to sit down and really take in the powerful messages that you all provided. This pandemic gave people an opportunity to slow down and really absorb what has become of their life and their digital life. And so, Jeff, I want to start with you. What has been the biggest surprise post-launch? It went live on Netflix September 9th, and what was the biggest surprise to you?
There's a long list of stories. I mean, our whole team is collecting all these anecdotes and experiences, and it's just been amazing to see what the response to the film has been. I think we were able to release the film at a time, still pre-election, where I feel like we just hit the zeitgeist, and I wasn't expecting it to be this much of a conversation. I was always hoping. I think every filmmaker, we always hope like the film gets out there, but it really hit something with the public, and we've just been blown away by the response to the film.
Oh my gosh. And Robert, you and Jamin and Kiowa really touched a nerve from the angle of how this tech landscape is affecting children specifically. What was the biggest surprise to you post-launch of Childhood 2.0?
Well, I would say we've had some really good feedback from people, even professionals in law enforcement and other places that have to deal with sort of the problems with the internet and social media and how they're affecting kids these days. And I think, the fact that it's become so pervasive and such a topic to really learn about and understand and try and catch up on. It seems like people are very grateful that they have this, that they've seen our doc, and they've said, it's really opened their eyes to certain aspects of the internet and social media.
That's amazing, and it's very compelling. And backing up, I assume, which I shouldn't do, most people watching either live or after the fact have seen both The Social Dilemma and Childhood 2.0. If you haven't, please, please, please make some time to watch both films tonight, this weekend, soon, right? Even, Thanksgiving holidays coming up, you might have some downtime. But for those of you who have not seen it yet, I want to give both directors a chance to just give a quick synopsis so you have a frame of reference for why we're talking about what we're talking about. So, Jeff, I'll start with you. Put The Social Dilemma in a synopsis for us.
Yeah, sure. I think for me, I was starting to hear from friends at tech companies about the manipulative design techniques that were inherent in some of the platforms, and we started trying to understand, like, why was this the case? Like, what is the underlying thing that's driving all of this? And it was hard to wrap our head around like all of these countless issues. And so the way I look at the film is it's really a look at what the advertising business model that drives many of these companies on social media and search, what it's trying to do, why, and the impacts that it has on society. And we tried to look at a handful of different impacts, of which for us the childhood piece was one slice of the conversation, and which is why I'm so thrilled that Childhood 2.0 exists, because it's really taking that what we were able to consider a scene in the film and really focusing on it in great depth.
Wow. Yes, you bring up something I want to touch on in a minute, which is just there are so many rabbit holes you can go down when you're talking about the past 15 years with regards to tech and humans. And so, Robert, for those of you who haven't seen Childhood 2.0, tell everybody quickly, what the film is about and what it dives into.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's really just about the way technology has exploded, and the information age, especially, and uh, it's happened so fast. Parents haven't been able to catch up with the things that their kids are being exposed to through smartphones, smart devices, the internet. And we really delve into subjects like depression and anxiety, uh, suicide, sexual predation, pornography. I mean, some of the really hardcore aspects of the internet, and how kids they just have so much more ability to find those things that we are having a hard time really knowing what they're watching when they're by themselves, or when they're at school, or when they're with their friends. So the documentary really sort of exposes some of those issues, and how prevalent they are, and what the experts are saying about it, and what some parents are trying to do about it.
Wow. I'm so grateful, again, to both of you for surfacing what you have. It's very critical. You'll see Bark behind me. It has nothing to do with pets. For those of you who don't know, Bark is a tech company that keeps kids safer online, and we had the honor of being featured in the film. So I'm actually in Childhood 2.0 along with our CEO, Brian Basin. And we, unfortunately, every day see alerts coming through regarding suicidal ideation, online predation, which has spiked because of the pandemic. And it's just so heartbreaking to know these things are happening to kids at a much higher rate than anyone would expect. And we wished for so long for somebody to be able to just educate parents, shed light on what tech companies know and can maybe do about it, empower the powers that be to enact legislation that will protect our families. And I just can't thank you enough. And Jeff, I have an 11-year-old son going on 12, and I let him have TikTok because only child, isolation, he's creative, the list goes on and on and on. And the things that he learned just about politics, which I say the things he learned, the misinformation he received and was fed to because of the algorithm, was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. What sort of stories have been surfaced to you
Yeah.
like that?
Well, I think TikTok is such an interesting one because it has this seeming innocence to it, and it's like so much dancing and it's art driven, and yet we're really starting to see that it's become a place for political misinformation in a really, really deep way. And I think this is one of the scary aspects of just how these platforms work inherently,
Yeah.
right? And I think this is why what we were trying to do with the social dilemma was trying to bring it back to like, what's the business model that's driving all of this?
Right.
We need to understand the consequences. We need to understand the cause, and we need to understand how these algorithms work, such that it is pushing us down a particular path. And I think this is a lot of tech companies and employees at the companies like to say, "Oh, we're just neutral. We're holding up a mirror to society, and society is bad. That's why you see bad things." And I think that really is just not taking the responsibility for what they're doing with these algorithms and for the role that they have in our civil discourse. An algorithm is not it's not has no assessment of human values, right? It's not amoral. It is unmoral. Morals don't apply to an algorithm. It's just looking to see, oh, what's going to keep Robert scrolling today? Let me figure out what's going to keep Robert scrolling, and let me keep showing, maybe this works, maybe that doesn't work. Let me try this thing. And oh, it turns out that this thing over here might keep this person scrolling. And that's what it's doing for all of us. Like, all of these platforms have just reverse engineered our weakest tendencies, like the thing that we're most vulnerable to. And that has huge impacts on politics. I think that's something that we've really seen grow over the last several years. I was a really heavy user of Facebook and other social media platforms up and through the 2016 election. And if I look back at my usage, like, it's an alternate world that I was being exposed to, that I think was drifting further and further away from a central shared, like the idea of a shared truth even. And so that was something where TikTok, Snapchat, all these platforms that have a feed, that the real objective is just time. We want to get your time. Your time is our money. And really the challenge is they now have content moderation, and they'll put a label on something, and they'll just catch the really bad stuff, but so much slips through the cracks. And I think that's the thing that has me really worried when you step back and look at the whole system. It's a system that's designed to just take anything in from everybody, regardless of truth, regardless of values. Just put anything, and we'll amplify, we'll pour lighter fluid on all of it, and then just catch, the things that people really don't like. And that's not a way that I don't think that yields the best in society.
It's interesting. I've seen both films multiple times. The social dilemma is like taking a pill, and then all of a sudden you see everything a lot more clearly, right? You look back at your life, and for me it was like, wait a minute, the vaccine misinformation, because I was in this mom group, and it's like all of the mysteries started to be revealed to me. And then with Childhood 2.0, it's like a future proof. It's opening your eyes to the my gosh, this is what my child will be encountering. Sexting is the new first base.
Yeah.
What? And suicide is the second leading cause of death now in kids in this country, and in some states the leading. How can this be? And it just really punches you in the gut. I read this book this year called No Filter, behind the scenes of the story of Instagram, and it talked about, the difference in spend between Hillary Clinton's campaign and Donald Trump's campaign, and how because Donald Trump's campaign worked with the Facebook reps more so, it maybe led to him winning the election. And when a social media can control the outcome of the political nature of a country, and is potentially contributing to skyrocketing rates of anxiety and depression in both children and adults, we have to do something. We have to shed light on it. We have to be the canaries in the coal mine.
Right.
Jeff, I'll ask you first. At what moment did you realize there is no going back? Regardless of what happens once the story is out there, there's no going back. The story has to be told.
Yeah, I think there was a point when we were just thinking about this film and this idea at the origin, where one of our subjects was referencing this as a climate change of culture. And that was like, well, first of all, my history was in climate change movies. And so I've been very passionate about that subject. And then when learning this, it was realizing, wait a second, there's something true to this. Like, a handful of people designed code that is shifting the way anybody who's on these systems, 3 billion plus people, are thinking, what they do on a daily basis, the way they get information, their reality. So it really is, these engineers aren't programming software, they're programming humanity. And how are they optimizing? What are they building it for? What are the end goals? It's about making money. It's about profit. It's about figuring out how to get people to come back. And there are all these unintended consequences of that have led to this litany of impacts, right? And so all of the impacts that we're talking about that young kids are living through now, it's not like some engineer is sitting there like, how do I cause a kid to, be more suicidal? That nobody's thinking that, right? That's not the intention. The intention was just, oh, the only data that the engineer gets is, oh, this user number 652A3G, spent 12 minutes on our platform yesterday, and today they spent 13 minutes. And tomorrow, and then, oh, they spent 20 minutes, and they spent an hour. They must love it. They love it. They're spending an hour a day. How do we get them to spend 2 hours a day? Right? That's the metric that they're optimizing for. And they didn't think through in many cases what the impacts of the way they were designing their algorithms, what those impacts would be on people. One of our subjects in the Social Dilemma says, he was one of the co-inventors of the Facebook like button. And he says, we didn't realize that the like button was going to cause people to, compare themselves to others. And like the notions of FOMO, the notions of self-worth and comparison, these weren't on their radar. And I grant them that. I don't believe that was an intended thing when they were designing this little feature and a little thumbs up. But now we have to look at, so what are these things doing to society, right? What is the impact that they're having, and how do we fix it?
I mean, so many paths we can go down from that.
Yeah.
Robert, I want to ask you the same question. At what point during the creation of Childhood 2.0 were you and Jamin and Kiowa like, well, I'm not going to say it because it's a bad word, but, like, oh my gosh, this is way more than we thought when we were getting into this. This is so powerful. This is so impactful. I believe Joel Stoddard, a doctor in Colorado, said essentially we're a living experiment. At what point did you realize this was something really big?
Well, I mean, I think initially when we were doing research, and you just look at the curves, and I believe both of our films had these, where anxiety and depression in kids, tweens and teens, rise dramatically, is with when smartphones are introduced into society, and it just keeps going up. And the same thing with suicide. So if you look at the big picture, you realize something really terrible is going on, and then trying to, I think our plan was to try and deconstruct that and kind of figure out, what are the aspects of this bigger problem, and how is that affecting kids, and it's not an easy answer because there's cyberbullying has become more prevalent, which is far worse than traditional bullying, in that it can follow you wherever you go, and it can be 24/7. Sexual predation has gone up because sexual predators now have easier way to find and groom victims. So, when you look at the bigger picture and see how this is all rising, with information technology and with smart devices and with access to the internet, I mean, at that point, we're like, we've got to really dive into this and look at all these different aspects and talk to the experts and figure out what's going on. And of course, we also talk to kids too, because you couldn't tell the story without getting it from their perspective, and figure out how they were being affected, or how they perceive the problems themselves. And there is a lot of awareness amongst them as to what's going on, but it's not making the problems any better.
No, I mean, Childhood 2.0 basically takes every taboo subject that you potentially never want to talk about with your kids and just smashes all, it's like, oh no, we are definitely talking about this because it's critical. You parents, I'm a parent, and I'm in this world, you just don't realize what life is like for kids today. Parenting was essentially the same, 1900s to the year 2000, right? I mean, give or take a few things, but it's seatbelts, it's sunscreen, it's don't talk to strangers, it's lock your doors, it's, it's one thing. And then you introduce this little smartphone computer and the internet that gives kids more power than the entire team that launched rocket ships into space when we were kids. It gives kids a way to access the entire world and gives the world a way to access them. And their frontal lobes are not fully formed.
Yeah.
And if you think that the social media companies are putting the kids' best interest over, their stock prices and their earnings, think again. It's time to wake up.
Yeah.
And the government, bless their hearts, doesn't move as fast as the tech sector. So like we've got laws from way back in the day that just aren't applicable. And you put that all in the pot with parental ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance in a derogatory way, but you just don't know, right? Give the average mom Snapchat and see if she can even navigate it. Meanwhile, her kid, knows how to navigate Snap Maps and can share their location in real time with anybody that they're connected to. The learning curve it's off the
Yeah.
scale.
A couple of thoughts on this too, and then a question I'd love to ask both of you as well. There's a framework around data, information, knowledge, wisdom, and the internet is really, really good at data and information, just like the answer to an explicit objective question. But the internet's not good at the higher order of like wisdom. Like the internet doesn't provide wisdom in many cases, and I've been thinking through lately, in a pre-internet, pre-smartphone era, we would go to elders for wisdom. Like the elders were the ones who had the best knowledge and information. And now we're training our youth around a mindset where if you've got a question, you don't go to an elder to ask the question. You Google it real fast, and you don't even click on the article. You just see the like summary and the snippet, and you're like, oh, I know that now. And we've moved away from, everybody has access to all the information that they could possibly want, but you don't have the context, you don't have the nuance, you don't understand, and we're losing out on wisdom. So I'm just curious, in any of your work, if you had any thoughts on like the changing relationship between youth and older generations. Like, are you concerned? Is that eroding? Is that disappearing? Like, what's that dynamic like? And is that something that either of you is thinking about?
Robert, you go first.
Well, sure. I'll just say. I mean, it seems to me like there's a huge disconnect now between the generations, and it's just like you're saying, Jeff. That's part of the problem is that people are going to the internet for answers, and not only that, they're just spending inordinate amount of time on their devices, even when they're with their family at the dinner table, like it's really well illustrated in your film. And people, there is like this level of addiction to it. And because of that, I think it's, once it's there and once it's in, it sort of becomes part of their way of, part of a kid's life and way of finding information or relieving boredom or, communicating with friends. It's so hard to extricate that device from their lives. And I do think like we need to like take a few steps back and try to take these devices out of our lives during family time, during school, times when we are learning and times when we're socializing and times when we're interacting with each other. And it definitely, there were a lot of times during the making of our documentary where it was just mind-blowing how even parents who were trying their hardest to figure out what was going on with their kids still were disconnected from them, and the disconnect was still happening because of the smartphones and the devices. Like it was just so difficult for them to all walk away from it for a while and just calm things down. And it's a sad commentary on society. And like Titania said, like the legislation hasn't been able to keep up with certain aspects of it. I mean, this is a little bit of a tangent, but things like Snapchat, where the default setting is if you post something on Snapchat, it geolocates your position. which is crazy to me. And that may have changed, since we talked to some people about that. But the default setting on all those devices should be protective of the kids and, their privacy and their security. And the legislators just haven't been able to keep up with that.
Right.
Yeah, Jeff.
It's just been so unregulated, like the whole industry.
It's don't get me started on
Absolutely.
that. But in regards to your question about the disconnect, I'm an anxious person, but I'm not an alarmist, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I am most concerned about the difference between the generation of kids and parents today than any generation in history, because we've got this thing that, to your point, lacks wisdom,
Yeah.
that's taking up both parents' time and kids' time, sometimes upwards
Yeah.
of 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
It's eliminating eye-to-eye contact, emotional
Yeah.
learning, nuances. It's exemplifying and highlighting the worst of the worst. It's a time suck. So you compound the lack of in real life time that parents and kids are having at critical ages and stages, sometimes even
Right.
before kids can walk and talk. You compound that with the fact that parents before tech could at least relate to their kids in some way, shape, or form for basic human relational nuances. Now parents don't even know where to begin with the, help my daughter's being pressured to send nudes, and help I'm being, doxxed online, and pornography addiction because all they had was a magazine at their uncle's house. Like, there's just no way of even relating. And how can you guide your child? Because that's your job as a parent,
Right.
is to guide them. How can you guide them if you don't even understand their landscape? So yeah,
Right.
it's a problem.
And one of the challenges too, I mean, I remember I was with a group of people and I was talking with them about the social dilemma as we were working on it, and there were three moms in the group, and they were all they were all agreeing and like, yeah. And then one of their daughters walked into the room, and a young girl, probably 4 years old, and she looked up at the three moms there, and they were all on their phones.
Yeah.
The moms were on their phones, and so this young girl now looks up and is like, well, I guess they're staring at these little glowing rectangles. What's on there? But then also the kid just like lost interest and just left because there was no human connection there. And the impacts on children far outweigh the impacts on adults. Just as you were saying, the prefrontal cortex is in a totally different place. Like the physical development is just in a completely different place. But what are parents doing? Right, and how are parents role modeling? I don't have children, but this was a really fascinating thing for me to experience while we were making the film. I was at a friend's place who has two young kids, and I was like in normal work mode. I was there staying, I was working on my computer, my phone, I'm out, and then the kids got home from school, and I was like, what are they seeing me do right now? They just see me staring at this glowing blue screen, thinking like, we're praying to these gods of these little, devices. And so it made me really think about, what does good modeling look like? What does good behavior look like? And I made a pact at that point, like those kids were not going to see me on any device. And I made sure like that work was happening elsewhere, or they weren't seeing me scroll on my phone, and I was trying to be as engaged with them as I could, and to have that presence and time with them. But it's challenging, right? This affects all of us.
It really does. We're getting questions from viewers, so I'm going to look at this
Awesome.
phone, but not to
Yes.
disconnect from the two of you, but so that I can see the questions. Dan asks, in a world where everything is under observation, how can kids find the sanctuary to be themselves?
Great question.
That is a really good question. I mean, I think really the only answer there is to be completely disconnected from the web, because it's not so much, I mean, after watching Social Dilemma, I do believe more in Big Brother now than I ever have before. Just the dystopian way it made me feel, after watching it and realizing like how deep the problem is, and how it's not getting any better because AI is getting stronger and stronger,
Right.
like on an exponential level. Actually, I mean, it's not Skynet yet, but it's
Yeah.
definitely slowly heading in that direction. And it feels like really the only way to do it is to completely disconnect. And it's not that, I'm a filmmaker. I love movies. I do have kids. I have two very young daughters, who have started to watch, um, kid shows and a couple of films here and there. And it's really hard to know how to approach that because it's not the internet, but it's screen time nonetheless. And I remember growing up as a kid watching TV, going to the movies. I think there were pros and cons to that experience, but even, they say even when watching an educational program with your kid, it's good to be there and to engage with them while it's
Yeah.
happening, because it provides this, this real world interaction,
Hmm.
and interacting with somebody who can impart some sort of wisdom, or who can keep their minds, turning while they're watching this kind of stuff. And it's really hard to know, like, at what point, we talk about this quite a bit in Childhood 2.0, but like, at what point do you give your kids smartphones? At what point is it just,
Right.
a necessity? Um, and it just feels like the later you can do it, the better off you are.
Right.
The more you can push it back and push back the internet, and keep everything in a sort of educational world, where if they're accessing something, it's really for research. And the question is, how do you monitor that at all times? It's impossible. So
One of the
um,
biggest
anyway.
regrets,
Yeah.
one of the biggest regrets that I have for all of you families out there of young children is letting screens, devices, gaming consoles, iPads, Netflix, you name it, be a babysitter for my child. It makes a great babysitter, short term.
Hmm.
The long term is not worth it. And I know that everybody needs to get some stuff done, take a shower, get some work done, take calls, especially, during this pandemic. But the way that their brains are being rewired, and the lack of creativity that it's sucking
Right.
from them, um,
Right.
if I could go back, I would not introduce those things as frequently or as early. So just a bit of wisdom there for you.
I think my parents kept the Disney VHS collection from back in the day, and I'm like, that seems perfect. It comes to an end. It's done. There's no autoplay. There's no based on what you've watched. We're going to show you all these other things, not YouTube for kids. And so, yeah, I think there's a you're dead on around the challenges of it being a digital pacifier, a digital babysitter.
Yeah.
To the question that was posed that came in, um, one of the things that I heard from a young kid that really stuck with me was, we adults don't understand what it's like to always have to be on, and that notion of like this pressure of your entire societal value, like the way you legitimize, the way you think of yourself is based on these numbers on this, screen on this app. How fast somebody responds to your post, who's responding, how many responses, like all of that validation is being programmed and puppeteered by these platforms in a way that we didn't have to deal with growing up. I mean, middle school was hard enough in the first place, and then you add all of this external pressure on top. It's extremely challenging, and I'm with you, Robert. I mean, in some ways, um, I've heard from a lot of people like no social media till high school. I think that makes a lot of sense. I look at, I really wish there were more and more like dumb phones. Like there's a phone called the Light phone, which is, I think I have it actually in my drawer next to me. But it's a phone that just does phone calls and text messages. There's no interactive screen. Like the screen is really really basic. There's no apps on it. You can't get lost in a whole bunch of other things, and that's in many ways all we needed when we first got cell phones, right? I just need to make a phone call while on the road or send a message. And I'm hopeful that some company is going to make something like that, where I don't need every app in the world in my pocket. I just need to be able to call home to tell them I'm coming home, or to send a text message around, hey, I'm running late to meet up with you, and maybe give me some map functions so I know how to get there. All right, what's that version of technology look like that's really designed just to support you, the user, you, the customer, and not try to manipulate you? That's that's my somebody please build that. Yeah.
Well, there are options out there. You know, the Palm phone is like half the size, and their whole thing is life mode. Like, get out and live real life, and let this be a tool that you control, not that controls you. And you know, for families, there's Gab Wireless, there's Pinwheel. You know, there's tech that's coming out there, but the problem is that, yeah, you can give your kid a dumb phone, or you yourself can use a dumb phone. But if your friend group, your peer group, or your world or your business is connecting in apps that aren't on your phone, you have to make a choice. Are you going to be left out? Are you going to be left behind?
Right.
Or are you going to play the game? And, you know, kids used to like go to the mall and go to movies, and they're not going out anymore. I mean, outside of the pandemic, they don't care about getting their driver's license at 16 because all the action's right here in their phone. They don't need to leave their house. It's literally a whole new world, which leads me to a question from, well, we have a viewer watching from Malaysia who says, thank you so much. So thank you, viewer from Malaysia. There is positive to tech, right? Like, it's not all doom and gloom. Tech is cool.
Yeah.
Tech is why we're able to talk tonight. And
Absolutely.
I am so thankful for tech for so many reasons, this being one of them. But one question that came in for both of you is, what shocked you the most when making these films? Robert, let's start
Robert,
with
you
you.
want to kick it off?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the big shockers was, well, I mean, two things. I think the suicide rate was a big shocker to me, and how young kids are getting who are attempting suicide, and to me that it's unfathomable for a 9 or 10-year-old to try to kill themselves, and
Yeah.
so to me that's one of the most horrifying aspects of the whole situation, but also how prevalent sexual predators are out there. You know, the scene where Titania and her team are setting up this fake account on Instagram, and how quickly people are attaching to it and trying to groom what they think are 15-year-old or even 11-year-old girls into, you know, meeting them. That was a real eye-opener for me, and of course my two kids are girls, so it's something that I'm really worried about, you know, going on as they get older, and as they become more vulnerable. So those were those were the two big aspects that really shocked me.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, that's huge.
Jeff, same question.
Yeah, I echo everything you're saying there, Robert. I think some of the suicide stats were just mind-boggling. One of the things that shocked me was this mindset that came from one of the academics that we interviewed. She wrote a book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. Her name's Shoshana Zuboff, and the way she talks about it is like, just as a lot of other companies figured out how to turn nature into money by like, let's drill this, let's dig this, let's cut down these trees. Now these tech platforms have turned people into money. It's like, oh, we figured out ways to just turn your time and your eyeballs into money by selling you and selling your eyeballs to advertisers. And that was just like, we don't spend any money. Like, Facebook doesn't cost us anything. Twitter doesn't cost us anything. TikTok doesn't cost us anything. Yet these companies are worth hundreds of billions of dollars, right? They're incredibly valuable companies. And where's that gap coming from between not spending anything versus how much they seem to be worth? And this goes just to the point that you made a second ago, Tatiana, around the the point you were bringing up about how not all technology is bad, and there's some great technology. And from my perspective, the easiest thing for me to offer is, what technology are you paying for?
Ah,
It's actually just a really, really simple question. We paid for Zoom to host a meeting longer than 40 minutes. We
yes.
paid for the iPhone to allow us to do a FaceTime call. We didn't pay for the Twitter app that's on the iPhone. We didn't pay for the Facebook app. We didn't pay for the Snapchat app. We didn't pay for a lot of things that they're making money, but how? And I think that's the easiest thing that I like to share with people is it's the phrase, we have it in the film, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And it's a simplification, but I find it's the easiest way just to think about, okay, am I actually the customer here? Am I the reason why this company exists, to just make stuff for me? Or are they trying to make stuff for some other customer where they're just trying to use me for that other purpose? And that's the thing that has, I think, been the most startling to me. It's like, for a lot of these platforms, we're just the raw resource. Like, we the public are the thing being sucked out of the system and extracted to sell to somebody else at very, very profitable rates. That was a huge wake up.
I think I rewound and played back multiple times the part about, there's two industries that refer to their users as users, right? The pharmaceutical company and then social media platforms. That's a gross paraphrase, but
drugs and social media.
Yeah, I was like, again, like, bad word. It's like, what? But that, I mean, and on that note, it's not just important for parents to have a wake-up call, but our parents, the aunts and the uncles that are in that Facebook rabbit hole right now, just misinformation and spewing hate. Like, they just don't have a clue, and they really need to watch both films and realize how they're being manipulated and how their words and actions are tearing families apart.
There's a phrase that one of our subjects used. Even if you're not on social media, you live in a world that does use social media.
Yeah.
Right. And even if you abstain or aren't involved, your friend circle is still getting information. The people who are voting are getting information on these platforms. Elections are determined by these platforms. It affects all of us in countless ways. And once again, children in some of the most extreme and most dramatic ways. I think that's been something where we are recognizing, we have a lot of laws to protect youth. There's an entire class of law. It's like, we know that children are vulnerable and we want to protect them. And yet when this technology came about, it's like, nope, okay, well, actually, you have to be 13 to use some of these platforms. Like, that's the law, and nobody enforces it, and nobody follows it. And we have a system that is just taking advantage of youth in such a terrible way, with no accountability, no enforcement, and no laws to really hold them to account.
One thing that really rocked me to my core, I don't know if either of you are familiar with the Child Rescue Coalition. It's an amazing organization based in Florida. And through their software, they help to identify tech and predators around the world that are in possession of child sexual abuse material. It's very important that we don't call it child porn, because it's not. It's child sex abuse material. And the fact that this company can show a map and see all these servers light up, and we know exactly where these people are and what they're doing and what networks they're using to file share, yet the biggest social media companies and tech companies aren't shutting it down, shame on them. They need to step up and they need to do more. And on that note, I want to ask you both about any backlash. Obviously, Jeff, not everybody loved the things that were highlighted. Do you feel that you've made an impact, though, and that maybe there's some dialogue happening now that is going to be positive for humanity moving forward?
I think that's certainly our hope. I think that's what all many filmmakers are hoping, that their films can accomplish that. Uh, in the case of The Social Dilemma, Facebook did respond with a public response, and they offered 7 bullet points arguing what we got wrong in the movie. I would love to just go through each of those bullet points and talk about it with them, but they, one of the things they said is that we are not the product, like refuting what I showed earlier. And it's like, if we weren't the product, if we all stopped using it, what would Facebook sell? Like, they would have nothing to sell if the public stopped using it. It is at its very core, we are the product. And I think in some cases, I am optimistic and hopeful that the employees within those companies are asking themselves tough questions right now. I don't think anybody wants to think that they're putting in their time and effort into a company that is affecting the state of democracy and affecting teen mental health and affecting suicide. Like, nobody wants to go to work every day creating that. And I think the challenge is that there's still a lot of denial, and there's still a lot of the drinking the Kool-Aid around the rose-colored glasses version of this tech that myself included, many of us had at its origin. I was a huge fan of these platforms. I was really excited for what they were doing. I thought there was a really positive impact at the start, and I hope the employees there are really asking themselves tough questions around, what do I want to be remembered for, and what am I contributing to with these systems. That's a huge lift, but I hope that that's happening.
Well, considering just the sheer volume of people that have viewed The Social Dilemma and will continue to watch it, I'd say you're doing some really great work there. And thankfully, people have hearts and a conscience, and ultimately, I hope people want to do good in the world and leave a positive legacy. So you've definitely spurred that. Robert, what was the hardest thing about all of the subjects that you all covered in Childhood 2.0 to really process? For me, it was when the parents of the child who died by suicide were talking about, I can't even, please.
Well, I mean, yeah, that was definitely one of the toughest stories to process, because we talked to them at length, and I think their story could have been a documentary in and of itself.
Yeah.
But Jack was the child who took his own life, and when his brother John said that was the worst day of my life, getting that call was just heartbreaking. I mean, it was, the whole thing was, but having a sibling that close, and again, not doing what you can, but not being able to stop what's happening, and a kid who was obviously really hooked into that culture and into the culture of social media, and knowing there was cyberbullying happening, all of that was really tragic. And I think for me, that was kind of the most heartbreaking experience I had making the film, just because I got to know the family, who were all really amazing people, and you just can't imagine something like that can happen to a good family, to a really solid, loving family.
And they were dialed in. That's the thing that really struck me, is the mom in particular did everything she could. They were doing everything right, and it still happened. And Jack, to the family of Jack, if you're watching, we just can't thank you enough for sharing your family's story, because while painful, hopefully you'll help to remove the stigma around mental health and suicidal ideation, and help to save others' lives. Another thing that you touched on, Robert, was the online predation and the sting that we were a part of. And Jeff, I'm not sure how deep your team dug into footage that we did not see in the final cut, of just the world of pornography and especially how there are hundreds of thousands of predators out there that are looking to communicate with children and very young children, and the laws that are supposed to exist to protect them are weak at best. I mean, tomorrow, Sarah Siegand reminds us via comment that there's a big Senate hearing tomorrow with Facebook and Twitter regarding child sexual abuse material. I mean, the fact that we still need hearings, like,
Yeah.
there's just still so much work to be done. So Jeff, if you
Yeah.
can speak to that element of social media.
Yeah, that goes beyond my expertise. Robert might have more to talk about that, but that's we didn't study the kind of pornographic angle as much. It is really remarkable how Facebook, and it's my understanding is a lot of it's through Messenger and through the messaging apps as well. So there are different ways in which these technologies are being used for different purposes, but there's a lot of nefarious actions happening just directly via the platforms on direct messaging as well. So that's just been a bit of a wake up for me.
Yeah. There's a lot of people in the comments reinforcing this line: if you aren't paying for the product, you are the product. Which brings me
Yes.
to the fact that there's a lot of people migrating to Parler and MeWe. They're both free apps, and their premise is, we're not Facebook, we're not going to sell your data, yada, yada, yada. How do you think they're going to make money? You think they're just going to keep these servers going for nothing, and with all these people migrating there? Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on the two latest platforms that seem to be taking off.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm not familiar with Parler's business model. I thought it was an advertising model, but I'm not positive there. So if you're saying it's not, I'm not sure. So this is one of the things that has been very consistent in Silicon Valley startups. It's that, oh, let's just get users and we'll figure out how to make money later. Right. And that's a huge problem. But that's the birth of many of these companies. It's like, here's money to go test something and figure out if you can get users or not. And then they deploy growth hacking techniques, and they deploy all sorts of ways to, the people you may know thing. You're on Facebook and it says, oh, you might know some of these people. That's just an algorithm. The Pymk algorithm, that's what they refer to it internally. And it basically is just finding, oh, Jeff knows Robert. Okay, here's another person that Jeff might also know because he knows Robert, and people like Robert, and then other people here. And I remember at the start of early days in Facebook, when I saw that algorithm, it would say, oh, you and Robert have 2 mutual friends. You have 5 mutual friends. We would know everybody. Like, oh, and you know Davis. Oh, and you know Daniel. Oh, you know this guy. How do you know that person? Now you see the people you may know algorithm, and it's like 120 mutual friends, 150 mutual friends. I'm like, I don't know any of these people. I don't actually know the vast majority of these people. And yet they've usurped the word, they've co-opted the word friend. They are introducing more of these connections to each and every one of us. Once again, because the goal is just to get as many interactions as possible. If I make a post and now 100 people see the post, if I can get 1,000 people to see the post, that's 10 times more revenue, right? So the whole notion of growth hacking is something that is really what made Twitter and Facebook as powerful as they've become. They figured out better than anybody else how to take this idea and to make it viral. And here's just like a weird, based on where we are with the pandemic right now and people thinking about our numbers and how fast things spread, the curves are going like crazy in the US again, because once again, this is viral. It spreads faster than the rate of 1. It can reproduce and it can grow, and then it spreads, and then it spreads, and then it spreads. And that's really what these platforms figured out a long time ago is, wow, if we get something to go viral, it can get seen by a lot of people. And then they figured out ways to make money off of that. Once again, this is not like, how do you have a stronger relationship with your friends and family? How do you deepen and enrich the relationship with your kids and family dinner time? It's not about how to be more informed in the world. The model was, how do we pour lighter fluid on things? And how do we get more people to see more things, because that's what makes us more money? And so from my perspective, the solve here is both simple and really complicated. The solve, like we it's just code. We could change the code. It's not really hard to change the code, but we have to change the entire thinking and the backbone of what these companies are offering, and how they're structured right now. I'm trying to remember where your question started because I just took us down a detour. But
It's totally fine.
yeah.
That's why we slated a bunch of time. You know, I've thought of 10 more
Yeah.
questions in this time, so you're not alone. One thing that we touched on earlier that I think is really important to bring up, because we all fall into it, children and adults, is the comparison trap. You know,
Yeah.
when you're a teenager and you have acne and your body's shifting and moving, and you know what I mean, and you don't have a six-pack and you're not tan, it's just hard. And you mentioned, you know, the fact that kids feel like they have to always be on, and we're always putting forward our most beautiful, filtered, curated, perfect lives, when behind the scenes it's just a filter. It's, you know, one of the many
Yeah.
filters offered. And now plastic surgeons have people coming to them saying, hey, can you make my face look like this XYZ filter on XYZ platform? What?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, what about inner beauty, and what about confidence, and pouring into what makes these young people great at their most vulnerable moments when their confidence needs to be built, and instead they're being faced with everything that they're not a part of, and everything that they're not. They're not
Right.
thin enough, they're not rich enough, they're not traveling enough, they don't have the coolest car, they're not dating so and so anymore, and look, they're so happy together. It's terrible. But flip side, you know, again, without social media and technology, we wouldn't be able to do this live stream right now. We wouldn't have been able to promote it.
Right.
It wouldn't live on after the fact for people to watch. So it's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, and it's a really hard place to be in. Jeff, how do you balance disengaging and disconnecting with the fact that you have this amazing film and people like us want to talk to you, and you know, how do you disengage appropriately?
I've stopped using all social media for the last 2 years, and like zero. I don't use it. I very oddly, I've been exposed to it more in the last couple months with people sending me, oh, look at this tweet about your movie, or
Right.
look at this thing. But I've removed the apps from my phone. I've installed things called the news feed eradicator. So if I went to facebook.com or twitter.com, there would be nothing to scroll through. And I want to have conversations with people, and having conversations and public conversations and Zooms and gatherings. Like, there's been a lot of that. And I like the ability to have a nuanced, in-depth conversation. Like try to take this conversation and summarize it into a tweet or a tweet storm, or like you can't convey nuance on Twitter. Right. I think that's one of the challenges, that we've lost the places in our society for meaningful, deep, like the gray zone conversations, which are really, really important. I mean, that's what politics is in many ways, right? It's like, oh, we have people who disagree. How do we come to an agreement around what we should do moving forward? And if everybody's coming like, I believe these facts, and other people are like, I believe these other facts, and nobody agrees, it's just like, who wins more power that they can push things through? That's not a productive society. So how do we, like, there's a huge shift that we need. For me, removing myself from social media completely has been great for my mental health. It's been great for my creativity. It's been great for my energy. I go to news sources for news, and I go to my phone, the actual phone app, to call my family, to call my parents, to call my sister, to have real conversation with the closest people in my life. And that feels great. Like, that's been my COVID protocol. It's like, get news from news sources, FaceTime with the people that you want to talk to. And I don't feel the need any longer. That urge, that pull, like the affirmation you get on your birthday when you get a gazillion, like, oh, wow, happy birthday. Like, no, none of those people know your birthday. They're not, like, they just saw that the system told you it was your birthday, and the system knows that, oh, let me ping Robert to tell Jeff happy birthday, because we both get like good vibes out of it, right? It's just messing with our brain chemistry in no real meaningful interaction there. it's been a funny it's like, who do I remember their birthday? Like, oh, those are my real friends from way back. Like that's a small group of people whose birthday I actually know and can recall. But I don't know. There is, you're absolutely right about this tension on promotion, and like there are many people whose lives depend on being on social media right now. I
Yeah.
fully recognize that. And if you've got a business or an internet business or something where you've like migrated and adapted and now your entire livelihood's coming through these platforms, that's really, really hard to shift. That's hard to get off of. But if you are able to get off those platforms, I think it's all the better for you. And in many ways, what I've been telling people is, if you're getting your news and your information via a social media feed, I'm going to be more skeptical of your stance on issues, right? For the sake of your brain, in many, many aspects, get off the feeds. Like, get off these platforms. Find what you're looking for, what you're searching for through real people, through real engagement, and that would be my hope. But it's hard. It's hard because they've figured us out.
It's woven into the fabric of basically everything we do. Robert, same
Yeah.
question for you. How do you simultaneously stay connected yet disengage, especially now knowing what you know?
Sorry, it's really tough, because being a filmmaker, of course, you're trying to reach a large audience and you're trying to get the word out. And just from a marketing standpoint, when I have a company that makes feature documentaries, and a lot of the way we inform people or stay connected to filmmakers overseas is through Facebook. So it's really difficult to disconnect. I mean, my kids sort of force me to disconnect because I have to like let go of it and be present, and during family time, and during everyday activities. But I've tried to not get my news through Facebook or other social media. I've never been a Twitter person to begin with, so I never. The only time I ever see a Twitter quote is through usually somebody reposting through Facebook every now and then. So I've tried to limit that, and I would like to do better, and I need to do better in the future, of course. But yeah, it's Jeff's got a really great point in that you should get news sources very deliberately, and communicate with people deliberately. I still communicate with people, with friends overseas through apps like Facebook or WhatsApp, or different platforms. But I try to keep it to that, just communication, straight communication, and I try not to look at political stuff or people's opinions through Facebook. I try to seek sources myself as well. So it's tough. It's really tough once you're embedded, especially if you're in the entertainment business or the media or any type of marketing business. It's really hard to extricate yourself from it.
Yeah.
It really
And
is.
to your point there, Robert, I still use the Messenger app or WhatsApp. Like, I have those apps because, as you're saying, like there are people that I only know how to reach through that platform. But if somebody reaches out, or a friend from a long time ago, I do try to migrate that off those platforms. That's kind of how I think of it. And I use Signal quite a bit, which is just another messaging app, but I trust them. And they're a nonprofit, and they were developed with security and privacy in mind. And so, can we migrate the conversation over to Signal and then continue to send messages back and forth, or audio or video? Yeah.
That's really great.
It's
That's
a
a
great
great
idea.
shout out. And yeah, to that point of tech that is good, tech that has more of an ethical mindset behind it. I love that suggestion around Signal. Full disclosure, as much negativity as I've spoken about a variety of social media platforms, I'm the first to admit I still use them. I have to. It's my line of work, and that's how I connect with people. And I do find pleasure, and I am slightly addicted to them, especially Instagram.
Yeah, there's the truth. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's you know what I mean. If you want to see what sucks up my time digitally, it's probably Instagram. But do I want my child to be doing that? Absolutely not. But I do want to give our viewers hope. solutions, next steps, takeaways. Robert, I'll start with you. What would you like to say to everybody watching both live and after the fact just about the state of kids, tech, social media, really anything?
That's a pretty big question. I would say, I mean, I think really what it comes down to, and it's a pretty obvious answer, is communicating with your kids and being open with them and talking about the hard stuff sooner than you think that you should,
Yes.
because they're going to be exposed to it um, at a much younger age than you could possibly imagine. And I think building a form of building that kind of communication with your kids, and to the point where they can tell you things that are embarrassing, that they might think are that they've done wrong. If you give them a place that feels safe to tell you those things,
Yeah.
I think that's the most important part of it. Because I also talk to parents, I talk to kids and parents who are super savvy. And part of the reason that the kids are savvy is because they have really open relationships with their parents. They could talk about pretty much anything. And, they gain they absorb a certain wisdom from their parents in that fashion. Um, my parents never talked to me about stuff like that. I learned a lot about life through my friends, which was not the best way to learn about life, in many ways, especially when it came to sex. So there are things that you want to be able to, you want your kids to be exposed to the big subjects of life, in a profound way, and in a way that's going to educate them and uh, give them the right perspective on life itself. That's I guess that's
Yeah.
all I can really say about it.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, I want to ask you that same question, but I also want to ask you a different question. Selfishly, I started a group a few years ago called Parenting in a Tech World, and yes, it's on Facebook, but there's like 90,000 parents in it now. If we wanted to take that community that has helped so many parents off of Facebook, where would we go? Signal?
This is one of the challenges right now, in that, as you were saying earlier, they've become the public square in some ways.
Yeah.
I mean, email newsletters are one option. The challenge is groups, right? Groups are still the tricky, and if you get into the design and the engineering of it, there are pros and cons on the whole notion of friction and adding friction into the system. So in many ways, these platforms have been designed to remove friction. And for some really positive application, it's really, really great when a lot of people can connect easily. But when you're talking about intentional misinformation going into the system, having it replicate really fast is a problem. So anyway, I'm sort of like, the way the technology is designed and the future versions of how this is designed, I think we need to really shift towards how humanity works, how people work with each other, and groups that are smaller in many cases but have deeper ties.
Yeah.
That's just one set of thoughts there. But with regards to so I don't know what to suggest to you in terms, if you have 90,000 people, that Facebook community is a solid place. But how do you provide resources and awareness to then get them off those platforms? Right, and what are the things that they're coming to? Why are they coming there? And is it a resource where, like the way we look at our website and the way we look at our social, we have social for the social dilemma, but the intention there is educational resources. Right. It's not, the goal in my mind is not to build a huge audience of people following us. Like, I don't want you to follow us. Please don't follow us. Just go and live your life. But can these resources help you live your life in a better way? Like, that's the question in my mind.
Oh my gosh.
To the earlier question around hope, I mean, I would suggest, if you've got the biggest challenge with a lot of this stuff is that people feel like they need to be on these platforms because other people are on these platforms, because my friends are on it, or my business is on it, or blah blah blah.
FOMO.
Right, and so there's so much FOMO at the adult level and at the kids level, but with you and your family, watch both of these movies together, with your COVID pod, with your kids' friends and their parents watch both of these movies together and have a shared conversation, right? Like, so who are the 5 closest friends to your kid? Who do they really, really care about? Whose relationships are important there? And have all of those parents and all of those kids come together and say, okay, what do you want your future to look like? Do you want this technology to guide and steer your future? What kind of rules and parameters do you want? How do you want to engage together as friends? What are the parents going to commit to stand in solidarity? How much time are you willing to cut back? What's your Instagram time on a daily basis, right? What does that look like for the entire family as a whole? And say, hey, look, we're doing this all together to make your lives better. And I think a lot of those kids will genuinely say, like, I don't want to be spending 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day on these things. I do it because it's easy, because it feels good. I do it because, I get the affirmation, I get the likes. We almost called it chasing likes at one point, in homage to our other films. But those are tough questions, but I do think that if a family engages in those conversations together, you'll get a sense of what your kids want and a better path forward for their mental health, for where they are in their development, and hopefully something that is a really, really positive outcome for the whole family.
Absolutely. Wow. Um, People are absolutely loving this amazing time that we're getting with you, Jeff, and you, Robert. And I'd be
Awesome.
remiss if I didn't ask, what's next? Now that, Jeff, you've got the social dilemma out there, what's next?
I just want to take a break, and I'm going camping next weekend with my girlfriend. We're getting off grid, way in the middle of nowhere. Like, literally, this has been a COVID pastime, is to get as far away from people as possible. But it really, like, that's been one of the things for me that has been really, really meaningful, is to reconnect with nature. But there are no films in the pipeline right now. I'm trying to take that slow for the time being.
That sounds amazing. Robert, I know
Robert,
it was,
what do you got lined
it's
up?
a very intense year. What's next?
Oh wait, you're muted.
Yeah, I think you're muted, Robert.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's been a busy year, and I tend to work on a lot of small projects as well, even commercials. There are a couple of features in the pipeline that are other people's projects that I may step on as cinematographer, which is what I do more than anything. And I think for the next couple months, though, it's going to be more low key. Things are starting to sort of die down, and I think it's just going to be a lot of family time and getting out and enjoying the weather while it's still decent and warm. So yeah, I mean, I feel like the next few months we're just going to be kind of weathering the current cycle of the pandemic, and letting these other projects kind of brew and talk about them, and maybe brainstorm some ideas for how to start them when things kind of settle down and become a little bit more normal, hopefully soon.
Right.
So, in the interest of time, since it's just such a precious commodity, I want to make sure that we close on time. So, I first want to thank you both so much for producing films that, the people who watch them will remember for the rest of their lives, and will hopefully inspire families and individuals and companies and the government to do better by, humanity. So I can't thank you enough, and I know the comments are awash with gratitude as well. I'd like to give you both some time to just leave some parting wisdom. Robert, I'll start with you, and Jeff, I'd love for you to close us out.
Well, since we're coming up on the holidays, I would say, disconnect and spend time with your family and friends, as much as you can in person, obviously considering what's going on. But even FaceTime, even use the technology to talk to each other face to face over, even if it's on a screen, and really, get to know each other, and talk to each other. That's really all I can say.
Yeah, your children, especially, will not regret it, right? You can always wish for more time, but you can never go back. So spend it with them while you can. Jeff, same question. What would you like to leave all of our
Yeah.
viewers with?
I'm gonna echo your thoughts there, Robert. I think if COVID, I hope that for a lot of people, COVID has been a wake up call around what's important in your life. Our time is limited, our time is precious. And do you want to spend that time endlessly scrolling, or do you want to spend that time connecting? And it can certainly be extremely challenging during COVID to have those connections, but all the more reason to prioritize and focus on that. Like, who do you want in your life, and how can you spend meaningful, quality time with them, and really tap into that. And that's challenging in many ways during a global pandemic, and different people are in different circumstances. But really prioritizing the things that are important to you, I think that's the most that one can ask for. And I would just add that question, like, to what degree is any technology providing that for you or not? And if you can think through, am I the customer? Am I benefiting from this? Am I being used by this? Let that be another contributing way to think through how you want to spend your time.
Oh my gosh, very well said. Jeff Orlowski, The Social Dilemma, Robert Muratore, Childhood 2.0, along with Jamin and Kiowa Winans. Thank you both so much, A, for putting this important work out there,
Absolutely.
and B, for your time. You've given us so much time, and I just can't thank you enough. So with that, we'll close. I know I'll be around looking through the comments and responding after my son goes to bed because of quality time. But yeah, any questions that we didn't address, feel free to pop them up. I'll get to them. The team will get to them. And yeah, y'all take really, really good care of yourselves. And thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Great seeing you, Robert.
You
Yep.
too, Jeff.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.